ado, let's get started. Over to you, Bill. Who are you?
Okay. Who am I? So I'm Bill Yuxel. I'm from Peridot Partners, and just so you know, Peridot Partners are an executive recruitment agency that work with not-for-profit organisations and education providers. Typically, we handle board appointments, so things like trustees, governors, and similar, as well as senior leadership roles. So everything from chief exec down to kind of senior manager level across every possible remit you could imagine. So we have put together some slides, which will just talk you through kind of a recruitment journey. So there's quite a lot of text here, so please do ask some questions and stick with me, but hopefully it will be helpful. We're going to look at how you can enhance your CV and your LinkedIn profile. We're going to look at some of the things that you might want to do in terms of maybe narrowing down your job hunt a little bit. And then we'll have a think about what to do once you've found an opportunity that excites you as well. So we'll get started. So the session works out as Rosie's kindly suggested, which is please use the chat. We'll aim to finish at the scheduled time. If we're running over, we can catch up in the coffee shop at the end, and just let you know the session is being recorded as well. So probably take that in consideration for what questions you might write. So as introduced, I'm Bill from Peridot. Just so you know, I'm a business manager at Peridot Partners, and I lead our work in the student union sector. I'm also a lay trustee at Wolverhampton Students' Union, and I'm the West Midlands ambassador for the Young Trustees movement. So I've kind of taught you a little bit about what Peridot do, so I'll not go over that again. So we're going to start with just presenting your experience. So this is about how to get your CV up to scratch, and how you might want to articulate some of your experiences on that document, as well as how you might want to do that on LinkedIn as well. So again, I've got some cards like this, and at the end of each session, there'll be a card, and we'll stop for a couple of questions next time we see a slide like this. So the first thing is about thinking about the role that you have and the context in which you work. So I can't see the participant list, but I'm going to be guessing that a lot of you are probably involved in SUs in some way or other, or maybe similar student volunteering organisations. I think the first thing I would say with organisations like that is to not make any assumptions about what people will understand about your role. So from experience, I was a vice president of a student association myself, and more often than not, when I was applying for roles, people didn't really understand the complexity of what that role was. And as the candidate, it's kind of our responsibility to think about how we articulate those experiences. So, you know, don't make too much assumption about what people might know about the organisation that you're with, whether that's in a voluntary capacity or an employed one, and start to think about how you might frame that. So, you know, what is the description you'd give for that organisation or that group? You know, what level of membership do you have? So whether that's as like a student activity group, you might have like 100 members involved. It could be that your membership is the whole of a university or similar. And it's worth thinking about, you know, are you a registered charity? What kind of size turnover you have? Again, even as an activity group or a society, I was the president of a drama society, and we had several £1,000s in our budget. So, you know, that could have been something that would be really good to articulate and highlight. It's worth thinking about the number of people involved in the operation and really outlining that for people as well, and kind of giving an idea about the scope of its operation. So for many people, when I speak with them about a student union, for example, they might not appreciate that, you know, a student union has a staff team of like often circa 50 full-time equivalent staff, and sometimes several hundred in terms of casual staff or in terms of volunteers, and it could even get into the thousands. So people won't always appreciate the scale of what some of the organisations that you're currently actively interested in and involved in, and it's just worth articulating that, because if you're asking people to make an assumption about your experience, the sad reality is it probably won't be an assumption that's made in your favour. So you just really need to make sure that you're articulating that well. It's then worth thinking about what skills that you have developed within the roles that you have. So, you know, I've put some here on this slide that I think would be broadly applicable to most roles within the student union sector, and similar organisations, where it's going to be that you are working in partnership with people, you're developing your communication skills, you're probably involved in some kind of governance or committee structure, and those are really valuable experiences that often other people at comparative experience levels may not have. So it could be helpful to bring those out and to talk about your role in relation to those within your CV. I would probably pick sort of 3 to 5 skills and really hone in on those rather than trying to list everything. If it becomes a shopping list, then those individual experiences become less valuable because you're giving them less detail. So it's really worth thinking about what elements you want to showcase and how you can bring those to the foreground. It's then worth thinking about what impact you've had. So we find at any level that many candidates are good at articulating what the role and remit of their role was. They're sometimes good at articulating what skills they've built, but very rarely do you see the impact that people have made. And if you've been in a role as like an officer or part-time officer or a society leader, or you've been involved in a media group, whatever it might be, the chances are you've been involved in something that's had an impact or a change for students. You may have raised money for a charity, you may have campaigned about something and produced some kind of results. So it's worth thinking about what the impact of you in that role that you have had, what challenges you've overcome, and how you've led to something positive in the end. And it's really important to think about that, particularly if you're looking for a role in a not-for-profit environment where organisations are in, ultimately an impact-based environment where they have to evidence outcomes quite a lot. So it's worth thinking about that in particular in terms of what you've achieved thus far. Again, that's kind of focused on your CV, and what I would suggest is with your LinkedIn, you start to think about those experiences and you start to put them onto your profile as well. So I would almost be mirroring your LinkedIn profile to your CV here. I'd make sure that you add all of the roles that you've held, be that professional ones, volunteering ones, project work that you're involved in, and really just outline, again, the role, the responsibilities and the achievements that you've had. What I would also think about doing is think about who you're following, who you're connected with, and if those are the right people as well for the kind of career path and journey that you're looking to go on. So from my perspective, I will try and connect with anyone that I've ever met in a professional capacity. I think that's helpful to have done so, particularly when you go to like conferences or whatever else. And I'd also try and like follow people in industries that I'm trying to access, so that I know, what the kind of leaders within that space are discussing on social media, what articles are they sharing, and is there any consistency or themes that are popping up that I need to know about as someone who's looking to build a career in that area. And it could be that you also want to have a look at what networking groups there are as well. So, for student unions, for example, there are a number of groups that you can join for professional staff in student unions on LinkedIn or similar as well, so you can share practice within those. It's worth highlighting anything that you do that could add value to your job experience. And that could include any mentoring, volunteering, trustee roles, or anything else as well. LinkedIn's great because you're not limited by space, and you can add as much detail as you want in as much in as much detail as you like for each role. It's worth adding a couple of recommendations for people that you've worked with. It can be a nice way just to have other people kind of validate some of the things that you've said and some of the skills that you've highlighted. I think with that, I would say get a few, but don't worry about trying to get hundreds. Ultimately, you have the ability to accept or reject things that go on your profile. So realistically, if someone gives you a poor review, you're probably not going to have that front and center of your profile. So try and get a couple, but recognize that there's only going to be so much value with it. I think the main thing on LinkedIn is to be active and be really proactive about liking things, engaging in the comments with people that are producing thought pieces or sharing articles. Make sure that you kind of share anything that you could be of value to your network too. And when you get the time, make sure that you create a little bit of content as well, that you're contributing something back towards that network, that you're sharing your thoughts, or when you read an interesting article, maybe that you share that with your network or anything similar as well. And I think by being proactive on LinkedIn, that can be really helpful. It's a growing platform every single day. Even in the 3.5 years that I've been at Peridot now, it's used more today than what it was just a couple of years ago. And it is becoming quite important to have a good presence, I think, in terms of being able to use that as a platform to secure opportunities. So I'm going to pause there, and I know that there are a couple of questions, and maybe Rosie can tell me which are the key ones.
We do. We've got some really good questions. So Sarah Redmond has asked, how important is it to have a really snappy about section on your LinkedIn? And what tips do you have for writing a good one?
Yeah, okay. So having an about section is going to be quite important there. So ultimately, people, when they're viewing your profile, that's going to be the first thing that they see. It's the first section. So I would suggest that you have probably a good paragraph or two there, and that you think about it in the sense of, why should someone read your profile? Why should they be interested in you? What role have you held? What achievements have you made? And are you open to people contacting you? It can be just a nice thing to say. What is it that you're interested in hearing about? Is it that you're interested in hearing about professional opportunities? Are you interested in hearing about board opportunities? Are you interested in hearing about speaking opportunities? So really telling to any prospective reader what it is that motivates you and why they should consider contacting you, and what might be the best method of doing that as well, whether that's a message on LinkedIn, an email, or whether that's a number or an email that you're comfortable in sharing.
Okay. Thomas has asked, is there such a thing as having too many things on your CV or LinkedIn? And he has a worry about, sometimes it's a bit boring maybe if you've got too much stuff. And if so, do you have any tips on cutting down and choosing those crucial bits?
Yes. So on your CV, I think you can put too much there, and sometimes people are tempted to focus primarily on professional roles and maybe sometimes overlook some of the board roles that they have. So again, it's worth thinking about, what role is it that you're pursuing, what you're going for, and what are going to be the important experiences that are in the role profile that you can articulate on your CV. Again, if you're depending on what role you have, if you have like a dual role, so for sabbatical officers, for example, in student unions, you may be a president or vice president or officer, but you may also be a trustee of the board, and that detail might not be apparent to someone not within the sector, so you might want to separate those roles at times as well. I always think that some people want to tell you every single role that they've ever had. If you had like a number of sort of casual roles that are not necessarily providing the experiences that are going to be helpful to your future roles, it might be that you want to talk about those in a more brief way than what you would some more recent roles, or it might be that you want to just say, between this period and this period, I did this. If you'd like some more detail on it, I'd be happy to share it with you, just so that you make sure that your CV document is concise there as well. I think for LinkedIn, less of a concern. I think you can add as much detail as you want, and you've got the ability on LinkedIn to like prioritize which bits get seen up the list. So you can add what you want, and just, I suppose, tailor the order of things in a way that you want people to see. Should we take one more, Rosie, if there's another question here?
Yeah, so Sophie's asked about, when you're connecting, about adding a connect message. This is something that is a bit of a bugbear of mine, when I get connections from people who I haven't ever met and they haven't said anything about why they want to connect. I don't know if I'm sure you get similar. What advice do you have for the sort of connect messages to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so it's worth just saying on those, who you are, why is it that you want to connect with someone? Is it that you are, I don't know, if you're like an aspiring marketeer, for example, and you're connecting with like marketing managers in an organisation that you maybe haven't met, is it worth saying, I'm really interested in breaking into this field, and I'd like to start connecting with people that are currently in it. If it's someone that you've met at a conference, you could just put, hey, I've met this person, we met at this conference, would be good to connect, and just keep it simple. You know, it's people like to know that you've got in touch with them for a specific and unique reason, and the more tailored your approach, the better return rate you'll have on people, kind of like opening your message or not click and ignore.
Just one more sort of question on that, just because it's a really good follow-up. Phil's asked, should you connect with people you don't know? What are your thoughts on that?
I connect with people that I don't know all the time. I think that if people are in a relevant sector to me, so you know, I work in the student union sector primarily, and within the charity sector beyond that. So you know, if people are professionals in that sector, that it's quite a close-knit community. So you know, generally I'd have no problem connecting with someone that I haven't met, or equally accepting a connection request from someone that I haven't met too.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm happy to connect with people as long as they tell me why they want to connect. Right, we'll pause questions there. We'll get through more of your questions later.
Cool. All right, so I'm going to continue from here. So we're going to assume now that you've updated your CV and you've updated your LinkedIn and they're good to go. So in terms of what you might want to do now to target your dream job, it'd be about finding a focus. So, you know, your career could take 1,000,001 different directions, which is wonderful. And if you're anything like me a couple of years ago, probably a little bit scary as well. And it's worth thinking about what it is that excites you, what type of roles might interest you, and what kind of spaces they're within. So, you know, it could be that your role is applicable to a number of different sectors, but that doesn't mean that you're motivated by a number of different sectors. So, you know, if you're a HR or marketing professional or finance professional, pretty much any organization needs those people, but you might not necessarily be interested in working for an oil and gas company, for example. It might be that you want to work for a charity. It might be more specific that you want to work for a youth charity or a student union or a university. So it's worth thinking about what kind of forum it is that you want. It's worth thinking about what role you want to have, both now and maybe in your next role after that one as well, because we know now that people, you know, have kind of several mini careers and they work for more employers than what they might have traditionally. So it's worth keeping an eye on the future and what role your next role might lead you on to as well. And it's worth thinking, sorry, went ahead there, some mouse wheel. So it's worth thinking about what kind of culture you're hoping for from your organization as well. And it is really worth spending a lot of time mapping that out. Some people thrive better in big teams, some people thrive better in smaller teams. Some people might want a culture where it's like office-based, or you might want something where it's more flexible working. I realize that that's a bit of a moot point at the moment with the pandemic, but you know, I'm sure one day people will be working in offices again, and it's worth thinking about, you know, what kind of interactions you want with fellow colleagues as well, and you know, what's going to be a good culture fit for you, because it's one thing to find the job that motivates you, but you know, if the organization's horrible and they don't reward their staff very well, or you know, the culture doesn't feel right, it won't be the right role and you won't thrive there, and it will be hard for you during that time as well as it will be hard for the employer as well. So really think about what it is that you want as well as a candidate from your next organization. I think then you need to evaluate yourself a little bit. So again, it's about going back, looking at what your key skills are, thinking about what you enjoy doing, thinking about what your values are, and looking at the roles that interest you going forward, and seeing if there's an alignment there, seeing how many of those skills you currently have and how many you might need to develop. So however it is that you save documents, whether that's on a folder or in the cloud or whatever, whenever you're looking at a role, I'd always encourage you to save the advert, save a copy of that, and save a copy of the role profile as well, so that you can keep track of, you know, what people are doing in terms of what kind of messages they're sending out to candidates, what experiences they're expecting candidates to have, what skills they're expecting of people, and what they're remunerating for it as well, because pay is important too within this. And then you can kind of look at that and think, are you ready to apply for these opportunities? Is there something that you're missing that you need to build? Or should you be giving this a shot now? Again, it's worth keeping an eye on the future. And if you're looking at like coordinator roles, you might want to download some of those adverts and role packs for managers as well, just so that you know what type of things they're expecting, so that you can make sure that you're building those into your next role as well. So to think about how they might give you the experiences to get where you want to be at the end as well. And just kind of write that all down, keep a track of it, keep a bit of a journal of it, and kind of have it to reference. I remember when I was finishing as a sabbatical officer myself, I applied to perhaps one too many jobs and mistakenly didn't take this advice. And then, it was hard to play catch up, because sometimes when a role is advertised and then they've closed for applications, they close the advert, so you can't then find the details later. So I've made that painful mistake myself a few times. It wasn't fun. So yeah, just make sure you make a copy of whatever documents you receive from your prospective organisation, as well as whatever documents you send to people. So again, once you've kind of found your sector, you've found those opportunities, you've started to see them, it's worth thinking about what your access plan for those organisations are going to be. So again, it's worth having a look at like LinkedIn or similar, and thinking about who in your network might be able to help you be able to find out more about opportunities. So, if there's key organisations that interest you and motivate you, and you've got a connection into them, it might be that maybe you can ask someone for a coffee in that organisation, or a quick chat, and just try and learn a little bit more about it, and learn how they want to grow, what kind of projects they're going to be taking on, and if there might be any opportunities coming up as well. Sometimes you can get the inside track on that, which can be helpful in the long run. It's worth thinking about where are roles advertised in your sector. So again, I've put a couple here. So, if this were me and I were looking for a job in a student union, I might look at The Guardian, I might look at charity jobs, I might look at SU Careers. If you want to be a finance professional, there'll be specific forums for that. If you want to be a marketing professional, you've got like Marketing Week and Campaign and other job boards that are relevant to that area. And again, it's worth just following those organisations so that you know when opportunities are coming out and keeping a track of it. You may want to sign up to some recruitment agencies that are handling a high volume of roles in your targeted sector as well, and seeing if there's a couple of consultants that you could maybe speak with and maybe build that rapport with, so that you're kind of on their radar as well. And again, if there's any organisations that you absolutely would love to work for, you might want to consider a direct approach. I would do that with care, and I wouldn't do that to everyone. But if there are, a few real absolute dream organisations, it's worth getting in touch with them directly and just seeing what you can learn, seeing if there's any opportunities available, and just kind of staying on their radars. So that's kind of how you might want to map out a sector. Are there any questions about that, Rosie?
We do have some questions, lots of good questions. Thanks everyone for sharing those. One from Phil saying their LinkedIn needs a lot of work. Can you recommend anywhere for one-to-one advice?
I think you for one-to-one advice on LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. I think if you're looking, I think the first thing I would do is be a bit of a LinkedIn stalker here and maybe look at what other people are doing, which sounds obvious, but it is worth seeing. Go through your network, see what messages it is that people are putting on their LinkedIn, and seeing if there's any common themes. And you can probably self-triage a lot of that, mm-hmm. And then get your LinkedIn into a better place. I think once you've got it into a good place and you maybe need some ideas, then you can maybe share it. And it could be that if you're connecting with recruiters in sectors that you're interested in, maybe they'll offer you that opportunity to speak with them directly. It's something I would do for people that are looking to stay in SUs that I'm likely to speak with and work with again, I'd always offer to give a bit of advice on people's LinkedIn if they want it.
Yeah, perhaps there's something that people can do if they go to the coffee shop after this. You could almost buddy up with each other and get an external friend to review your LinkedIn for you.
Absolutely. It's you should be doing that regularly with your CV and with your LinkedIn, and ideally give it to someone that knows nothing about the sector that you work in, because that way, if there's anything that you might not know from like knowledge about the sector, then they'll probably be able to identify that a lot easier.
One more question that's sort of LinkedIn based, and then I've got a more general question for you. So Frankie's asked that if you're looking for work in 2 different sectors, do you think it's best to make 2 tailored CVs and then keep LinkedIn broader?
Yes, that is correct. So as you develop through your career, it will generally be the case where you start to develop more than one CV. So it might be that you have one for professional roles in one field. It might be that you have another for a professional role in another field. And it could be within that you're, I suppose, zooming in and minimizing certain roles. And just sort of tailoring that approach. It could also be that, one of them is more tailored to professional roles and one is more tailored to like trustee or board opportunities in the future as well. So yeah, that absolutely. And then for your LinkedIn, it's a bit more of a catch-all because you've only got one there. So.
Yeah. I'm just dropping in the chat. Lots of consultants that we work with in the student movement have offered up their time for 30-minute free chats. So I've just dropped a link in there. So if anybody does want half an hour, you can use that time for whatever you want. And there's a bunch of really good consultants in there that are happy to have conversations with people. So that might be useful for anybody that wants to pick some of this stuff up with an external who potentially doesn't know you. We'll do one more question now, Bill, and then we'll carry on. So Sarah's asked, how do you think coronavirus is going to affect the job market in SUs? A big question. But what do you think about that?
How do I think the coronavirus? So yeah, it's going to affect the job market. So I think that it's a question for individual SUs. I think that what we are seeing is that student unions that have built incredibly strong relationships are a little better insulated against this. And I think it's very much a question about how, it's often a question about what the finances are like and how commercially leveraged student unions are, as well as to whether or not they can take a risk or not. I realise I'm generalising quite a bit there, and that situation will be different, and for some people they might have worked really hard and things just might be out of their control, so I'm probably not going to comment too much on the general. I think what we have found so far is that CEO opportunities are still continuing. However, we are finding that a lot of, I suppose, managerial roles and senior managerial roles are on pause at the moment. Personally, I think that's a little bit of a shame because I think every single time I went into an SU for a briefing, I always get told that engagement with distance learners, with remote students and students on other campuses could be better. And, given that we're all working remotely and having to be highly innovative at the moment, that seems to me that the work that you would do in this time will have benefit for years to come, improve engagement with all student groups for years to come. So it's ultimately for each organisation. I'm not sure there's a response I could give for the whole market, but
I think lots of, from what I've seen from people I've been working with, a lot of student unions are at this really strange point where they're the institution that they work with have no idea where budgets are going to go. So some unions I've been talking to are actually looking at a budget increase because there's a recognition that doing things remotely and stuff's going to be expensive, and some are looking at quite drastic, like 20-15% budget decrease, which would massively affect any new recruitment that needs to happen. So I think for right now there's quite a lot of uncertainty, which means that I think a couple of SUs I'm working with are pausing on recruitment just for a couple of months while they work out what their budgets are going to look like. But I think overall people need to be working in SUs, don't they? So there are going to be jobs.
Yeah, I think so. And, you know, as a trustee of a student union, we'll be going to market still. I think ultimately this is an incredible challenge. And from my perspective, I'm a little bit biased. I think that there's never been a more important time than now to have the right leadership in place for any organisation. So I've probably got a vested interest in the answer to that question. So I'm not sure how much more helpful I'll be on that, I'm afraid.
Well, we'll pause on questions now and we'll try and get through a few more when Bill finishes. So keep them coming and we'll get through as many as we can.
Cool. So we're going to think about what we might do when we're applying for a role now and how we might want to approach that. So I've made the assumption that you would be using a CV and supporting letter. I have included a little bit of guidance in a moment about application forms and online tests. I'm not personally a fan, as you'll see from my comments in a moment, but I'll cover the supporting statements for now. So it's worth, again, referring back to those documents. So again, what's in the role profile? What is the responsibility? And importantly, have they told you what elements they would be testing at the application form or at the supporting statement page? So sometimes on better role profiles, they will outline what they're testing within the process and at what stage they're going to test it. And that gives you the opportunity then to effectively to copy and paste those headings into a Word document and then and either combine each of them or write under each of them what your example around that might be. It's worth thinking about what tool you use to write your answers. I would use the STAR method, which is situation, task, action, and result. And what that will do is that will highlight the context and the challenge that you had to overcome. It will highlight what your action was, and it will highlight what the result and impact of that was as well. So it will give you a start, a middle, and an end, which is really good. Again, often within supporting statements, we see people give a start and maybe like a middle, but not necessarily articulate whether or not the thing that they've done has actually made a difference. And given, again, that most organisations that you will apply for will be quite impact focused and results focused, it will be important to articulate the impact and results that your actions have had and the result of them. So again, it's worth thinking about clear examples here. You know, if someone knew nothing about the organisation that you've worked with, would they still be able to understand the example that you've given them? Have you used any buzzwords or any acronyms? You know, from my time in universities and student unions, love a good acronym, but you know, even things like NUS, people won't always understand like what that is as an acronym. So you still have to, for the very first time that you use them, make sure that you just highlight what that acronym means or what that word is or what a definition of it is if you feel that you can't complete your example without giving it. And it's again worth thinking about what your motivation for the role is and why it is that you actually want that role. Is there anything that's inspired you about that role? Anything that captured your particular interest or motivation about it? And I think the final one on this is making sure that you check expected lengths. Detail is really important, as is appropriateness of length. So, you know, if an organisation's asked you for a 2-page supporting statement, for example, and you give them 2/3 of a page, it's probably not going to give them the detail that they wanted. Equally, if I've asked you for 2 pages and you give them 6, you know, I wouldn't personally be very confident that they're going to have read all of that because it's exceeded what their expectations were. So it's just worth looking at what they're going to measure you against and the length of that and making sure that your return is appropriate to that. As a recruiter who looks at a lot of CVs and supporting statements, it is very obvious when people return something which is not bespoke, and maybe the first paragraph has the organisation's name and the last one says, I'd love to work at X, Y, or Z, and the middle of it's a bit of a copy and paste job. It is important that the document that you send is bespoke to the organisation, and experienced hiring managers reviewing applications will know the difference as well. So again, I would be suggesting to you that you'd have a higher success rate if you applied for less roles but invested more time in each one than what you would have if you sort of mass marketed your CV and application, as it were.
We've just had a quick question that I wanted to pick up
Yep.
before we move on. Phil's asked, what do you mean by buzzwords?
So it could be anything that's kind of unique to your sector that people might not necessarily understand. So it could be acronyms. Like some student unions will have a junior common room. So you hear a lot like, oh yeah, like we work through the JCRs or something like that. And like, if you've not worked for junior common room, you won't know what that is, for example, necessarily. So, because not everyone has it, but for the people that do have it, it's a huge part of their life often, and the way that they operate. So it's just about thinking about what people that might not know your organisation might mean those words to be.
Thanks.
So if there's an application form or process, there's a couple of little tips that I'd recommend with this. So personally, I happen to have dyslexia and dysgraphia. I find application forms quite difficult, and I know from other people that they sometimes share that difficulty because the formatting can prevent good spell checking softwares from working at times. So what I would encourage you to do is always, where you can, download a copy of those forms and just try and edit them via Word, or take the headings if you can't do that, and then just write below in your own document, and make sure that you've got that document, that it's still as neat and presentable as what you would if it were a normal written submission that you'd provide. And then you can also save a copy as well, and make sure that you're keeping that document for future use as well, so that you can refer back to it if you are selected at interview stage as well. For some roles, they will use online processes. Again, not massively a fan of those, but because you don't necessarily know what you're going to be asked, what you can do is sort of join perhaps with a test email or similar, and just go through and walk through the assessment process and make sure that you feel confident and happy with it, so that you know what you're being asked. And that way it will give you a chance to prepare yourself as well for things. So you might want to be able to write them offline and refer back to them or similar, just so that you can prepare your submissions in an appropriate way, because sometimes those bits of software can be quite unforgiving at times. So it's just making sure that you've prepared something appropriate and that you know what you're getting yourself in for when you go through your live submission, if you will, as well. That can be quite helpful to do with that. I think the final tip is to be proactive when you're applying for a role. So if you've seen a role, it's captured your thoughts, your interest and your imagination, and you're interested in applying, I would always encourage you to pick up the phone and speak with, whether it's the recruiter for the role, if it's like the manager who's recruiting for that role, or even if it's just someone from, like, if it's a large organization, it might be someone in like the HR team or similar, and having a conversation with people. Ask what the context of that role is in reality, if there are any targets, if there are any risks, what's going to be expected of you in the first 6 months or the first year. Are there any challenges that the organisation maybe isn't able to articulate on the advert? Because there is often a bit of context to any given role, and it's important that you know that as a prospective candidate, so that you're applying for opportunities with your eyes open, and that you're going in aware of what the risk and what the opportunity is. If you feel that you've built a good rapport with whoever you're speaking with, you can always ask to submit a draft application. The worst that will happen is they'll say, no, sorry, we can't do that. And you'll just submit it as you would have anyway. But if you can, then it means that you can be proactive. You can submit something in advance and get a bit of feedback on it from either the recruiter or from the hiring manager, whoever that might be. And that's something that can be really helpful, just to make sure that your documents have landed in the right way as well. So I'd always encourage you to be proactive. I personally would never apply for another job again without speaking to someone at an organisation that I was planning on working with. And if the organisation isn't willing to give you that time to at least have like a couple of minute conversation, I would probably be asking some questions about if that's someone that maybe shares my own values as well. But that'll be something for you to decide on. Any questions from that, Rosie?
Yep, there's loads of questions. We'll get through as many as we can. So in terms of what you've talked about just then, Matt's asked about using the STAR or CARL. I haven't heard the CARL method on a CV, or is that just, would you advise for cover letters or supporting statements?
Yeah, I'd probably do it for the supporting letter and statement more than the CV. I think you might not get all of the scope and all of the like context of the role otherwise. But,
yeah. And then there's quite a broad question from Prina about how to get work in an SU for graduates. So I don't know if you want to answer that one now or at the end.
Yeah, it might be that you want to keep a look at SU careers. That will be where most of the opportunities in the sector are hosted. So I'd keep an eye on that. Most SUs that I've found would be very receptive to you being proactive, and you getting in touch and asking if there's any opportunities. And equally, when there is a role, I've yet to meet an SU lead person who's recruiting for a role that isn't open to having a conversation with a prospective candidate as well. So when you see something that you're interested in, be proactive.
Thank you. And I'll save the rest of the questions because I think one of the questions that's really popular is about interviews and online interviews in particular. So, and you're about to chat about that, so I'll let you get onto that bit.
No problem. Well, and I've based this mostly on in-person interviews, but we can cover online interviews as well at the end. That's not a problem. So the main thing to do once you've applied, you've got everything together, you found your dream role, what you're going to do, it's about making sure that you go into that interview room, whether that's an in-person one or whether it's a Zoom, knowing that you've done your research on the organisation and that you've had a good chance to prepare as well. So again, make sure that you've got a copy of the role profile. Again, you need to save these because, going back to my previous point, sometimes once an advert is closed, your access to those documents will also close with that. So making sure that you've kept a copy of that document so that you can look through that, look through the role profile, look through the responsibilities, and you'll probably find that you can start to guess what some of the question themes might be. You'll never be able to guess the exact wording of the question, but you can pretty much guarantee what themes are going to pop up. If you're a senior manager, for example, you're probably going to get asked about strategy or contributing to strategy, or perhaps something about budgets or project management or similar. So you can kind of start to think about how you might address some of those questions as well. So it's also worth knowing about the organisation, knowing that you've done your research, know that you've read like the last set of their charity accounts, so you can see what kind of position they're in. If there's any documents that they've put out, like a strategy, making sure that you've read that, so that you are talking a language that is going to be appropriate to that organisation. You know what their values are, you know what their mission is, you know what it is that they want to achieve over the next few months. It's then worth thinking about why you're there. So what's your motivation? What is it about this organisation that makes you want to work there? Particularly if you're already in another job, why should you want to stop doing what you're doing and start working for this organisation instead? I like to think of things in a bit of a narrative and sort of storytelling way, and I would approach it from the sense of, if I'm being interviewed, what 3 things do I absolutely want the panel to come away learning about me or thinking about me? Are there any particular experiences that I think would be appropriate? Is there anything, about my values or my motivation that I feel that I need to have said by the time I've left the room? And it's worth thinking about what they might be and how you might be able to feed them in as well. The reality of interviewing is that every single person that you meet is likely to be involved in the organisation in some way. And when you are turning up to interviews, if you're rude to like reception staff or people taking you on tours, that kind of comment will be fed back to people. So making sure that from the moment you step foot on that organisation's office, that you're acting in a polite and sort of courteous way. And I think for online interviews, it's about making sure that the people that send you links, it's about making sure that people that interact with you via email, that you're being polite and respectful to those individuals too, even if they're not on the recruitment panel at the end. If it's an in-person interview, it's good to do a trial run of where you need to go. See if you can get there on time, know what the bus route is, or where you're going to park your car, or where the taxi drop-off point is. Things like that can make a big difference on a day. If there's multiple campuses for a student union, which campus is it? Because, like at Wolves, for example, we've got 3 campuses. If we were interviewing at the Wolverhampton City campus and someone turned up to the Walsall campus, probably going to be quite difficult. So, make sure that you know where you're going, that you can do a trial run of it as well if you can. If it's a Zoom interview that you're doing, or a Teams interview or similar, it's worth making sure that you've prepared your room appropriately. So making sure that you're happy, you're somewhere as quiet as you possibly can be. Obviously, there's some limitations to that for some people, which is can't be helped. But what you could do is do like a trial call with like a friend or a family member, and just ask them, can you see my video okay? Can you hear me okay? Is my connection stable? Is it glitching? Is it jumping? And do that in advance of your interview, in good time before your interview, so that if there are any technical issues, they happen on that call and not when you join an interview panel. If you haven't used the interview software before, like Zoom or whatever else, or Teams, ask whoever's hiring if you can do a quick trial run with them, or if there's a way that they might be able to talk you through what it is they're planning to do as well. When you do get a question, and inevitably if you're being interviewed, there will be some questions, just take your time in answering them. You don't have to give the first thing that comes to mind. You can take a moment to pause, to reflect. If there are 2 or 3 examples that you have, you can say, I've got 2 or 3 examples. This is what this one roughly is. This is what this one is. Which one would you like to hear? So that you're still being concise as well. And again, it's just about going through, making sure there's a start, a middle, and an end to each of your examples within that. And try and give one example would generally be my advice. Then stop, ask if they're satisfied, or if they'd like another example from that, and then that'll make sure that you're concise as well. At the end of the interview, you'll get an opportunity generally to ask some questions. It is really important that you ask some questions. People can sometimes be a little bit offended when you don't ask, and there are always some questions that you can ask. Can you tell me a little bit more about the culture? Easy question, you can always ask it. Can you tell me about what the priorities might be in 6 months or in a year? What does success look like in this role? If you're feeling brave, you can also ask, is there anything in this interview that I've not covered that you'd like to learn more about as well? Which is something I would personally ask it if I was being interviewed as well, just to give you an opportunity to address any gaps that the panel may feel that you've had as well. So it is really important to ask something. If your question's already been answered, then say what your question would have been, but say that you've been satisfied that that's been covered, unless there's something else that the panel would like to add to that as well, just to show that you at least did have a question, even if it has been covered. So those were the tips for interviews. So is there anything you might want me to cover in Zoom interviews more, or?
I think we're going to run out of time. So what I propose we do is we just do one more question, and then because there's so many things that people want to carry on chatting about, I encourage you all to join table 2 in the coffee shop and carry on talking about it. And then also, Bill, if you want to drop Peridot and your Twitter accounts in, I'm sure people can chat on Twitter as well. So I think we'll just do one more question. And Matt's asked, is it okay to bring notes to an interview?
Yeah, I wouldn't see any problem with that whatsoever. The more proactive candidates have been, in my opinion, the better. So if someone brought some notes, that's just shows that they've done their research to me.
Cool. I will have to wrap up there because we need to finish the session so that people have time for a break and go
Rosie,
to the next
could you
one.
kindly share the coffee shop link with me, please?
Yeah.
I'll go and join that, and then I'm happy to stay on there for a while if anyone wanted to catch up in that.
So yeah, I've shared the coffee shop link. Bill's going to head over there and have a chat with a few of you. A couple of you have sent me LinkedIn requests whilst this has happened, so very proactive.
Did they personalise the response?
Well, I knew them both already, so but that would really made me giggle. Thank you, Bill, for this really good session. I've learnt loads. There's tweaks I need to make to my LinkedIn profile following your advice, so thank you.
I hope that's helpful.
Really helpful.
I look forward to seeing everyone in the coffee shop.
Yeah, this is the bit where in a normal room we'd have a nice round of applause, but in a Zoom talk it's all a bit strange at the end, but there's lots of thank yous coming in on the chat, so thanks very much, and thanks to everybody for tuning into this session.